Your Eminence, what made you write a book on the spiritual life?
Well, amidst the confusion of this day,
They assumed he was finished. They whispered that his influence was waning among the old guard. They claimed the church was moving forward, modernizing, liberalizing, and globalizing. Yet, deep within the marble halls of the Vatican, one man stood motionless, a cardinal forged not through cocktail diplomacy, but through the fires of silence, prayer, and unwavering faith. Cardinal Robert Sarah. To his enemies, he is an impediment. To his supporters, he is a prophet. And to millions of devout Catholics around the world, particularly those disillusioned by the Church's progressive drift, he is the last true defender of tradition. Cardinal Sarah made headlines again this morning, not for scandal or reform, but for a thunderous announcement that rocked the Catholic Church's current direction. A statement that was not only bold, but defiant, a warning shot against what he calls the creeping surrender to secularism that is infecting the Church from within. Even though he didn't mention names, everyone knew who the target was. Sarah and Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle have long been polarizing figures in Catholicism. Tagle, the media-friendly Filipino cardinal, has been hailed as the smiling face of progressive Catholicism. Sarah, the austere Guinean cardinal with a steel spine and a theology based on sacred tradition. Sarah emphasizes discipline, repentance, and spiritual clarity, whereas Tagle advocates for reform, dialogue, and openness to modern culture. It's not just a clash of personalities, it's a battle for the future of the Catholic Church. And now the war has begun a new chapter. What exactly was Cardinal Sarah saying? Why are insiders describing it as the most confrontational statement by a high-ranking prelate in years? What does this mean for the Vatican's power balance, especially given Pope Leo V's public silence? In today's expose, we look at the dramatic announcement, the ideological fault lines it revealed, and the global ripple effects that are already underway. Because when Cardinal Sarah speaks, he does not shout, he does not rant, he prays, he pierces, and when he moves, the Church listens. Stay with us as we explore the conflict between orthodoxy and modernity, Cardinal Sarah's defiant stance, and the Vatican's uneasy response. And by the end, you'll understand why this could be the moment that changes everything. Something is rotting inside the Vatican's hallowed walls. To the outside world, the Catholic Church appears unified, a seamless institution led by a single pope, guided by centuries of tradition and operating in harmony. But behind the red cassocks and solemn liturgies is a simmering civil war that has quietly divided the Church's highest ranks into two irreconcilable camps, the guardians of tradition and the architects of reform. And at the heart of this conflict are two men, Cardinal Robert Sarah and Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. One speaks in thunder, while the other smiles. Sarah represents the Church's hardline conservative wing, those who believe that truth does not evolve, doctrine is not negotiable, and the Church must become a moral compass rather than a reflection of the world. Tagle, on the other hand, has long been regarded as Catholicism's progressive future, a charismatic communicator who is well liked by the global media and an outspoken supporter of modernization in tone and policy. Where Sarah sees moral clarity, Tagle sees the importance of pastoral flexibility. Whereas Sarah defends the Latin Mass, sacramental reverence, and the permanence of Catholic moral teaching, Tagle advocates for inclusivity, dialogue with other faiths, and what some refer to as a gentler church, one that listens more than it preaches. To the average Catholic, these may seem like internal debates, but insiders believe this is a battle for the Church's soul. And it isn't just theological, it is political, institutional, even personal. Under Pope Francis's previous pontificate, Tagle was widely regarded as the preferred son. His appointment to key Vatican positions, including the dicastery for evangelization, was interpreted by many as a sign of the Church's new direction. Some believed he was being groomed for the papacy, a soft-spoken reformer to continue the liberal momentum of the post-Benedict period. However, not everyone was cheering. Cardinal Sarah, despite being excluded from curial leadership, became a spiritual lightning rod. His books, God or Nothing and the Day is Now Far Spent became bestsellers among traditional Catholics. His speeches at liturgical conferences drew large crowds. Without holding office, he continued to lead in silence, orthodoxy, and resistance. Then came the scandals. Progressive bishops in Europe and Latin America were embroiled in controversies involving sexual abuse cover-ups, financial mismanagement, and doctrinal confusion. A growing number of Catholics, tired of what they saw as moral relativism, began looking for someone who could speak clearly. They discovered him in Sarah. Tagle served as a symbol of compromise rather than hope. However, within the Vatican, these tensions were treated as secrets. They took place behind closed doors, with ambiguous press releases and cold looks across long meeting tables, until now. Until Cardinal Sarah's recent announcement ripped the mask off, because this time he did not remain silent. This time he spoke with the full weight of spiritual warfare in his voice. The old truce is over. The lines were drawn. Make no mistake, this is no longer a debate over pastoral methods or liturgical aesthetics. This question concerns the Catholic Church's commitment to timeless truth or succumb to the whims of the age. Next, we'll go over Sarah's thunderous announcement, including what he said, who he was speaking to, and why Vatican insiders are already referring to it as the moment everything changed. It came as a thunderclap. Early this morning, as much of Rome slept beneath the cloudy spring skies, Cardinal Robert Sarah issued a statement that reverberated throughout the Church, from the dusty hills of Guinea to the cathedrals of Europe and the halls of the Vatican itself. It wasn't simply a letter. There was a line in the sand. The document, titled simply On the Crisis of Fidelity, was originally published by a small French Catholic outlet before being translated into multiple languages and going viral on conservative Catholic networks. Within hours, it had been shared by bishops, quoted on Catholic radio, and analyzed by Vatican commentators around the world, and its message was unmistakable. The Church does not have to reinvent itself. The Church must remember herself. Cardinal Sarah declared war with that opening line, not on anyone in particular, but on the ideological drift that he sees eroding the heart of the faith. Without directly naming Cardinal Tagle or Pope Leo XIV, Sarah warned of a culture of surrender among church leaders, a willingness to compromise eternal truths in order to gain worldly approval. We were not called to become popular. He wrote, we were called to be faithful. When the Church blesses what she once condemned, she ceases to be the bride of Christ and becomes a concubine of the world. His words were not without fire, but the timing and tone were different. Sarah wasn't simply defending the doctrine. This was a call to arms. He criticized the growing acceptance of ambiguous pastoral language regarding same-sex blessings, communion for those in irregular unions, and the erosion of sacramental reverence. Mercy without the truth is a lie, he wrote. Compassion without clarity is cowardice. Then came the sentence that caused clergy to gasp as they read it aloud in diocesan offices around the world. The smoke of confusion has filled the sanctuary, and those in charge of guarding the altar now hand over the keys to the world. Insiders believe this is a thinly veiled rebuke of Cardinal Tagle, whose emphasis on pastoral openness has prompted many progressives to reconsider long-held church positions. But perhaps the most astonishing part came near the end, when Sarah announced that he would begin holding monthly global rosary rallies, not for any political cause, but for the preservation of apostolic faith in the face of internal subversion. He urged bishops, priests, and lay Catholics to join him in standing firm in the armor of truth, even if it meant breaking away from their own diocesan superiors. If I must be alone with Christ in Gethsemane, I will not leave him for the approval of men. The reaction was instant. Traditional Catholic websites erupted in jubilation, hailing the speech as Sarah's Benedict moment, a point of no return. Twitter and TikTok were flooded with clips, voiceovers, and analysis of his statement. Some compared it to a modern-day 95 Theses, posted online rather than on a church door. But not everyone was impressed. Progressive voices within the church began issuing quiet rebuttals. One European bishop accused Sarah of sowing disunity. A Jesuit publication suggested the cardinal had succumbed to a politics of nostalgia. And one anonymous Vatican official reportedly told an Italian journalist, if Sarah keeps this up, he'll talk himself out of the church's future entirely. However, Sarah's allies argue that the Vatican does not have the authority to decide the future. It belongs to the faithful. And as images emerged of packed churches in Poland, Nigeria, and the Philippines organizing rosary vigils in response, it became clear that Sarah is no longer only speaking to Rome. He's speaking to a sleeping church, and he wants her to wake up. Despite the praise and condemnation, one question echoes throughout the marble halls of power. How will Cardinal Tagle respond? He did not address him by name. He did not need to. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle took the pulpit during a quiet mass at the Pontificio Collegio Filippino in Rome, just 36 hours after Cardinal Sarah's thunderous declaration sent shockwaves through the Catholic community. There were no cameras. There are no press releases, no applause. However, those paying close attention, particularly those within the Vatican, were well aware of what was going on. This was a counterstrike. His tone was calm. His pace is deliberate. He smiled warmly at the seminarians assembled before him. However, beneath the pastoral gentleness, there was steel. The temptation in every age, Tagle preached, is to confuse rigidity with righteousness, to cling so tightly to the letter of the law that we overlook the law of love. There it was. To the untrained ear, it was simply a reflection on today's gospel reading. But to insiders, it was a subtle but unmistakable rebuke, a response to Cardinal Sarah's vehement language about cowardice, confusion, and compromise. The Pharisees were deeply religious, Tagle explained, his voice never rising. But Christ wept not for their lack of knowledge, but for their lack of mercy. Make no mistake, this was a battle over visions, not volume. Where Sarah thundered about apostasy, Tagle used parables. Where Sarah summoned warriors to spiritual arms, Tagle used careful metaphor to convey his message. But the point was clear. Tagle was challenging Sarah's worldview, which he considers exclusionary, harsh, and out of touch with today's wounded souls. The Vatican took notice. That evening, the Italian news site Il Sismografo published the headline, "Tagle's Gentle Rebuke, a Sermon for One." Major Catholic outlets began dissecting every phrase of the homily, debating whether it was simply pastoral reflection or a coded warning. Those who divide the church with inflammatory language risk isolating themselves from its future. Privately, progressive bishops rallied around Tagle. Several German and Belgian prelates praised his compassionate leadership and vision of a church that walks with all. One cardinal allegedly texted a colleague, "Sarah roars, Tagle rules." However, others were not as convinced. African and Eastern European clergy saw Tagle's response as a passive deflection, refusing to address the central issues raised in Sarah's letter. One Nigerian bishop, speaking anonymously, stated, "Tagle speaks of mercy, but mercy without truth is like medicine without a diagnosis, and behind closed doors, sources say tensions are rising." Some curial staffers now refer to the division as the silent schism, not a formal break, but a slow, grinding rupture between two visions of Catholic identity. Two visions, embodied in two cardinals, are now locked in what Vatican insiders refer to as a Cold War for the future of the Church. But there's one more player whose silence is becoming unbearable. Pope Leo XIV. As the battle lines become more clear, many are wondering why the Pope has not spoken out. Is he attempting to mediate from behind the scenes, or is his silence a tacit approval of Tagle's approach? So what happens to Cardinal Sarah now? That answer may arrive sooner than anyone expected. Something is brewing behind the scenes. In our next expose, the Vatican silence may be broken with a statement that could change everything. As the world's two most watched cardinals spar, one with thunder and the other with silk, one man has said nothing. Pope Leo XIV, the man dressed in white, the newly elected pontiff, the successor of St. Peter himself. Since Cardinal Sarah's explosive declaration was released, the Vatican press office has remained silent. No statements, no clarifications. There were no words of comfort or correction from either side. Not a single mention of the ideological firestorm engulfing the Church's upper ranks. And in that silence, speculation has turned into a roar. Why hasn't Pope Leo XIV spoken? Is he preserving unity, watching and waiting? Or more dangerously, is he making his move from behind the veil? Many believe the silence is intentional. During his career, Leo was known for being a methodical and brilliant strategist. He is quietly measuring his moment. Others suspect he has already chosen a side, and it is not Sarah's. The rumor started weeks ago. According to sources in the Curia, Pope Leo recently held an unusually long private audience with Cardinal Tagle, followed by an unannounced dinner with several progressive European bishops. At the same time, several traditionalists, who had previously been regarded as papabili during the conclave, had quietly reduced their roles. Invitations were withdrawn. Agendas shifted. Some close to Sarah speculated that the new pope was consolidating power around Tagle, preparing him for the next phase of evangelization under a more modern, pastorally engaged model. Then something changed. A report emerged, buried deep in an Italian Catholic blog, that Pope Leo had met privately with Cardinal Sarah only 10 days ago. No photographs. There's no transcript, no response from the press office. However, insiders claimed the meeting lasted more than an hour. A senior Vatican official was overheard saying they disagreed, but the Pope listened. The implication was clear. Leo had not dismissed Sarah. He was still watching him, maybe even weigh him. However, the ambiguity is deafening. Pope Leo XIV was elected to the chair of Peter with promises of healing divisions and building bridges. But what happens when both sides of the bridge believe the other is attempting to set it on fire? To traditionalists, Leo's silence is a betrayal, a failure to defend orthodoxy in a time of crisis. To progressives, it's tactical genius, giving Tagle room to maneuver while allowing Sarah to exhaust himself. And for the world's 1.3 billion Catholics, it primarily creates uncertainty. At a time when the Church is facing global persecution, declining vocations, and cultural irrelevance in much of the Western world, the faithful are left wondering who is truly leading. Who has the vision? Who dares to speak clearly? The Pope's silence could be diplomatic. Alternatively, it could be the precursor to something seismic, because recent reports indicate that a major announcement is being prepared behind Vatican walls. An internal memo allegedly circulated among curial staff refers cryptically to structural shifts in evangelization leadership and a reaffirmation of mission clarity. What does this mean? Cardinal Sarah has spoken, Cardinal Tagle responded, and now all eyes are on the one man whose voice has the power to break the silence or ignite the storm. What does Pope Leo say next? Could permanently alter the power dynamics within the Catholic Church. By the next morning, the Vatican had still not responded. However, the world had already responded. Cardinal Sarah's bold declaration, intended as a spiritual wake-up call, shook Catholic communities like a theological earthquake. From dusty mission chapels in Africa to ornate cathedrals in Paris, the global faithful no longer wondered if the Church was divided. They were choosing sides. Sarah's words were received as sacred fire in conservative strongholds such as Poland, Nigeria, and parts of Latin America. Parishes started organizing rosary rallies. Bishops read his letter from the pulpit. A viral TikTok video of Sarah's most piercing line, "The Church does not belong to politicians in white robes. It belongs to Christ," attracted over 5 million views in 24 hours. Catholic YouTubers, podcasters, and independent journalists dubbed the event a spiritual revolution, with hashtags like #StandWithSarah and #RestoreTheFaith trending across digital Catholic spaces. In the United States, several traditionalist priests read Sarah's entire letter aloud at Sunday Mass. Then came the laypeople. A mother from Arizona posted a video with tears in her eyes. "I left the church years ago. I didn't recognize it anymore. But Cardinal Sarah, he just brought me back." A young seminarian from Manila tweeted, "We love Cardinal Tagle, but Sarah tells the truth. We need clarity, not slogans." However, not all responses were supportive. In Germany, several progressive bishops publicly distanced themselves from Sarah's remarks, calling them irresponsible and divisive. In one statement, Sarah was accused of using pastoral alarmism to undermine ecclesial unity. In Belgium, a group of theologians wrote an open letter warning that language like his risks fostering schism disguised as piety. The liberal Catholic press fired back. Articles flooded in with headlines like "Cardinal Sarah's dangerous nostalgia" and "Tradition isn't truth." One well-known European cleric even mocked Sarah's call for monthly rosary rallies, saying, Beads and incense alone will not save us. We are saved through action and reform. The division was no longer limited to Rome. It was now pulsing through parishes, universities, seminaries, and homes. Cardinal Sarah had started a fire, and it was not going out. Meanwhile, Cardinal Tagle's defenders quietly gathered. Prominent progressive voices from Canada and Latin America praised his restraint and humility. A Filipino bishop released a video calling Sarah's letter painful, but insisting that Tagle's silence was the true Christ-like response. And yet, Pope Leo XIV said nothing. The global silence only added to the confusion. Was the Pope waiting to intervene? Was he quietly supporting Tagle? Or, as whispers spread, was he about to surprise everyone? Because despite the attacks and criticism, one truth had become indisputable. Cardinal Robert Sarah had accomplished what few in the Church could. He had galvanized the believers, he'd reawakened the dormant, and he had forced the world's largest religious institution to look itself in the mirror and ask a question few dared to raise. Have we forgotten who we are? But the real shock was yet to come. Something was shifting inside the Vatican. There are whispers of a major change, rumors of a new appointment, and a growing belief that Cardinal Sarah's moment was more than just a rebellion. It was a comeback. The silence at the top of the Church is seldom meaningless. In fact, inside the Vatican, silence is a strategy, a message wrapped in mystery. And now, as the fires of Sarah's declaration rage throughout the global Church, whispers within the Leonine walls grow louder. Something's about to happen. Sources within the Curia report an unusual level of activity in the Dicastery for Evangelization, which is currently led by Cardinal Tagle. Meetings have been moved. Schedules are cleared. Pope Leo XIV held private sessions with senior cardinals who favored tradition over reform. Internal communications were marked as classified. One high-ranking official, speaking on the condition of anonymity, allegedly told an Italian journalist, "Sarah's name appears on the table. A major reshuffle is on the way, and it will not be what people expect." What about the rumor? Pope Leo may soon remove Cardinal Tagle from his key role, or, at the very least, reassign him quietly, while restoring Cardinal Sarah to a prominent leadership position, possibly with global pastoral influence. Traditional Catholics would see this as nothing short of vindication. For Tagle's supporters, it was humiliating. Some believe the Pope is doing this to restore balance, to appease conservatives while not abandoning the Church's progressive momentum. Others argue that Leo is simply testing both men, seeing who rallies support and who folds under pressure. But amid the political calculations and backroom meetings, a deeper undercurrent has emerged. One that speaks to something more ancient, more prophetic. In traditionalist circles, an old phrase has started to resurface: "The African shall rise." It is based on a little-known 20th century private revelation, long dismissed by modern theologians, which stated that in the Church's darkest hour, an African cardinal would raise the banner of truth and lead a return to orthodoxy. For years, it was little more than folklore. What about now? With Cardinal Sarah speaking out boldly, rallies forming in his name, and rumors of papal favor swirling, even moderate Catholics are wondering if this is the moment prophesied of. Inside Rome, the action is fast-paced. Careers are hanging on a thread, and the man once dismissed as retired, irrelevant, or too rigid for this era is now the most powerful name in the Vatican, and he has yet to be appointed. But that could change at any time. When it happens, one thing is certain: Tagle will not leave quietly. The sun slowly sets over the Vatican, leaving long shadows on St. Peter's Square. The crowds have thinned, the bells have stopped ringing, but the tension in the air remains thick, unshaken, unspoken, and unresolved. And somewhere within those ancient walls, Cardinal Robert Sarah kneels quietly, not before cameras, not before microphones, but before the crucifix, eyes closed, rosary in hand. A man at peace, yet surrounded by a war he didn't start and may be destined to finish. Because the question is no longer whether Sarah will be called back to power, it's when. He has already reawakened a dormant church. He forced the world's largest religious institution to confront its own identity. And whether you see him as a prophet, a purist, or a polarizing figure, one thing is certain: Cardinal Robert Sarah will not back down. The faithful chant his name. The hierarchy observes in silence. What's the next move? It belongs to Pope Leo XIV. However, with rumors swirling, meetings being held in secret, and Cardinal Tagle's position on the verge of collapse, the winds of change are gathering strength. A storm is coming, and it has the potential to permanently change the course of Catholic history. In the eyes of millions, Sarah is more than just a cardinal. He is a symbol, a standard, the final defender of the faith. The Vatican is preparing for a leadership shift, and the world is watching to see if the defender will finally be given the power his supporters have long demanded, or if the internal conflict within the church is just beginning. So what happens next? You won't believe this.